Okay, so obviously after the official opening of the conference, the person who sits next to me needs no introduction. However, as is customary in events like this, I would share some brief notes about the first plenary speaker of IL8. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce the current president of IL, Professor Bernd Kortmann, Professor of English Language and Linguistics at the University of Freiburg. And it is indeed a great pleasure because I have known Bernd for about 30 years now. Wow. And since we first met, we had a constant academic but also personal relationship, a relationship which has also involved our two universities, the University of Santiago de Compostela, the University of Freiburg, in various ways along the years. So not only from the very active Erasmus Plus partnership between our two universities and our two departments, but also different research stays of Freiburg teaching staff in Santiago, and some of them around here, and also of Santiago students and senior scholars, including myself, in Freiburg for some time. So Bernd was also a plenary speaker at the 25th conference of IDEAN, the Spanish Association for English and American Studies, that we organized in our university back in 2002, long time ago. Moreover, he was also a guest professor at our university 10 years later, in 2012, when we invited him to deliver a doctoral course on grammatical variation in the Anglophone world. And Bernd and I also shared concerns, when both of us were deans of our respective faculties in the early 2010s. His dean, again, for the third time, I guess, yeah? So over the years, we've been in constant contact, both academically and personally. But academically, over the years, Professor Kortmann has published extensively on various topics, including semantics, semantic change, grammaticalization, typology, history of linguistics, and English grammar. But what has become his main research interest over the last couple of decades or so is the grammar of non-standard varieties of English around the world, especially from a typological perspective. And in this area, he is widely recognized for the two-volume multimedia reference work, A Handbook of Varieties of English, and especially, most especially, for the open access electronic world atlas of varieties of English, eWave. Most of us have used eWave sometime. His list of published works is so impressive that it would take far too more time than I can afford to mention them all. Just to give you a rough idea, his publications include 4 monographs, 17 edited volumes and special issues, and about 100 research articles and reviews in journals and collective volumes. And among them, and because it is particularly dear to me and has had a special influence on my own research and on the research of some of my doctoral students, some of them also in the room, I would like to mention his monograph, Adverbial Subordination, Typology and History of Adverbial Subordinators, based on European languages, published in 1997 by Mouton de Ruyter. He's also the co-editor of 2 Mouton prestigious series, Topics in English Linguistics, Dialects of English, and also of the Cambridge University Press journal, English Language and Linguistics, which is the official journal of IL. Moreover, Professor Kortmann holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Eastern Finland and is an elected member of the Academia Europaea. And between 2013 and 2022, he was the director of the Freiburg Institute for the Advanced Studies for the Humanities. What about IL? Professor Kortmann has been president of IL since 2023. This has given me the opportunity to strengthen, to increase the already close collaboration or contact with him in the context of the executive board of IL, where I have served for the last 4 years. My term also finishes during this week. And it is precisely as president of IL that I invite Professor Kortmann now to deliver his presidential address, which he has titled English linguistics in the next quarter century, prospects, problems, and promises. So Professor Kortmann, my dear Bernd, we are all looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us about those 3 Ps, those prospects, problems, and promises of the International Society for the Linguistics of English. So the floor is yours.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for this very warm introduction. I mean, the presidential table and the speeches, that was the starter. I think it took about half an hour. By my convenience and experience, I would say the main dish typically lasts at least twice as long as the starter. So be prepared, but don't worry, it won't be an hour. I want to say a few words about the title indeed. Basically, I tried to find something even with more drive, let's say, than the subtitle of the entire conference. And so what can better expanding horizons? And it looks, I seem to have a knack for tricolons in the subtitle. And so I came up with prospects, problems, and promises. I always wondered then afterwards, why did I choose this? And then I asked ChatGPT what ChatGPT has to say on this, and then I knew why I had chosen it in the end. It's a tricolon with a trochaic rhythm and a dactylic ending, a great persuasive device enhancing memorability and authority. The front-loading of stress sounds strong, like a series of punches, and creates impact and assertiveness. The dactyl at the end breaks the monotony and makes the ending feel expansive and optimistic, matching in the positive sense of promises. Well, all of this I had in mind exactly when I chose this. So let's see whether I can live up to this. I had many sources of inspiration for this talk. One important starting point was indeed Elizabeth Traugott's IL-1 plenary in 2008, which will be a point of reference throughout. I think this would also be perhaps one opportunity now for us to acknowledge that some of you in the room still know Elizabeth Traugott and we also know her works. Could we hear some sort of audible appreciation? Elizabeth, I hope you will hear this and remember this. So she gave the very first plenary at an IL conference, and it was a plenary where she also looked out at what are the strengths of English linguistics at the time, 2008, and what are most likely going to be the continued strengths of the field and where should it go. So she made clear, among other things, the important role that English linguistics and the English language itself had played ever since the 1950s and 60s in theoretical linguistics in general, but she also highlighted the importance of usage-based grammars, and as another field of research that English was strong back in 2008 and where she said it's going to remain strong is in the field of language variation and what she called globalization of English. Later on, she also talked about the responsibilities of English linguistics and of the society, and I will return to these responsibilities later. I had some other input, some things that I had done in the past, but in general, what I can say is that I have drawn, in fact, on a wide range of recent studies, especially many meta-studies under this very wide umbrella, expanding horizons or problems, promises, etc. And well, I don't have 60 or 70 minutes, so I need to be very selective. And I selected, in fact, those topics that I also announced in my abstract. So I will look at all of these points that you see here, and very roughly, you could say there is a first part that includes the first 4 sections, which rather have a focus on the discipline, and this part will take something like, but let's say well over 2/3 of the talk. And the second part will be fairly brief, let's say 10 to 15 minutes, where I address topics that, in my view, let's say, have primarily a focus on people rather than on the discipline. So let's start with the quantitative turn, a turn that we have observed since the 1990s and the early 2000s. It's a turn both in scale and in quality, a turn concerning the degree, including the degree of sophistication, to which quantitative empirical studies, statistical techniques, and probabilistic modeling have come to be used and determine linguistic research. When we talk about quantitative empirical studies, these are largely corpus-based, but also experimental. And even in fields of linguistics dominantly working with qualitative methods, some degree of quantification is increasingly expected, especially for journal publications, as we will see. So from a nice to have, let's say, still in the early 2000s, it has become a better to have. Overall, I think the quantitative turn has been a largely positive development. It has many strengths, a great potential. But what, in my view, is important in the future is that we should have especially multi-method approaches combining corpus-based and experimental studies. So I think we should have more studies where usage meets studies on language processing, and both actually also feed in, for example, about what we want to learn about language acquisition. A recent novel approach, by the way, that I really came across only a few days ago is an approach that is called psychohistorical linguistics that uses frequency analyses of historical corpus data as experimental and training input for artificial language learning and small or baby language models in order to reconstruct or simulate the language learning process of L1 and L2 learners in critical phases of Middle English and Old French, and critical phases from the point of view of structural change, for instance, evolution of modal verbs or introduction of do support. Okay, so this is a really fascinating new approach, and I know that there are two members of this research team also in the audience. The major driver of this quantitative turn has been corpus linguistics, undoubtedly. So we know that just for English we have more than 100 English corpora. And I simply wanted to look at some recent meta-studies that have been conducted, especially on journals that are relevant for our community, where many of us publish. And all of these meta-studies were interested in the question to what extent we can read off a kind of quantitative turn from the publications in the lifetime of, let's say, 10 years or even 20 years. So don't worry, I will not look at all of them. So a quick survey here would be that, for instance, for the journal English Language and Linguistics, so the IEL journal, we had a look at this on the occasion of the 25-year celebration of ELL, and we were simply interested, can we read off a quantitative turn if we look at all the journal issues from 1997 until 2020. Sarah Buschfeld and colleagues, they did an even larger study on 6 journals that you all see listed there. They looked at this 10-year time span between 2011 and 2021, so that they looked at almost 800 articles. For ELL, we had looked at about 300 articles. A smaller study was done by Tove Larsson and Doug Biber, for instance, where they looked at 4 corpus linguistics journals, and they only compared, let's say, the entire year of 2009 with the entire year of 2019. There are more such studies. I will only report on the first 3 here, and only very, very quickly, because the story is quickly told. And I think, especially if you look at this graph, you can simply see that when you look at the qualitative, dominantly qualitative journal publications in ELL, well, the arrow is very clear, and on the other hand, we have a clearly rising arrow of studies where statistical measures are used, and when one then, and in fact, one can actually also see that both simple and advanced statistics are increasingly used in the ELL publications. Sarah Buschfeld looked at all these journals, as I said, between 2011 and 2021, and I think the most important point to keep in mind, or the points that are worth keeping in mind, are those when we look at the overall trends. So they really distinguished between 125 different data analysis methods and sort of compared them across this time. And the outcome is that simpler methods like chi-square or log likelihood tests are still widely used. There is evidence of a quantitative turn in linguistics, but advanced methods remain a minority. Especially true prediction methods are used not very often. At most, I think they're used in language variation and change. And they say there is no evidence of a statistical revolution, but advanced methods risk overshadowing linguistic interpretation, making accessibility a concern. So they already point that there may be a clash between advanced statistic expertise and knowledge and linguistic interpretation. And this is a point that is made even stronger by Larsson, Eckbert, and Biber when they compare the 4 journals that you see here in the year 2009 with the relevant articles in 2019. So what they actually went more into word counts, okay? And I think we can just read together what it says on the slide here. So they compared 2 types of reporting in these journal articles. Statistical reporting, measured in number of words, covers prose stemming from quantitative results that could be summarized by a non-linguist, or at least by someone with only very limited training in linguistics. At one end of the spectrum, this category covers prose summarizing findings based on descriptive statistics or simple statistical techniques. By contrast, linguistic description, also measured in number of words, requires a human analyst with training in linguistics, as this type of reporting involves interpretation of quantitative and qualitative results. Now, when you just compare, for instance, the values for the mean that you have here in the rightmost column, and you compare 2009 and 19 for statistical reporting, you see that the number of words for statistical reporting has almost doubled compared with 2009, whereas when we look at the relevant figures for linguistic description, we have a corresponding decline of number of words for description. So I think the message overall is relatively clear, and you can also show wonderful box plots that ultimately tell us the same story. I don't want to go into this, but it's simply further nice evidence visualizing this increase in statistical description and decrease in linguistic description. Okay, so what is it that the authors of this paper then actually conclude? Most linguists are trained in linguistics, not computer science or statistics. The field's strength lies in linguistic analysis. So their concern is a shift away from linguistic description, and that this shift away from linguistic description towards ever increasing, ever more advanced use of statistical models could change the nature of corpus linguistics, maybe even of linguistics in general, and that one should therefore need safeguarding, a kind of safeguarding, a focus on language and the linguistic interpretability of the results. And the overall stance that they actually give at the end is statistical sophistication is welcomed, but corpus linguistics must remain grounded in its ultimate goal, learning about language and language use. So if one wanted to visualize this, I'm not very good at these kinds of things, then one could say that, okay, until the early 1990s, we had linguists, and we had then also perhaps the odd case where a statistician was consulted, helping the linguists with the statistics. What the situation currently is, I think, is that many of us have turned into linguisticians in a way, and I capitalize statistician because there is this danger that there is more statistics in this linguistician than in terms of language description. Since I want to talk about AI in a minute, I also included a current trend that we already see, and I think that will become even stronger in the next few years already. And this is that for the statistics, we increasingly start using also artificial intelligence. We all know that LLMs are very good at writing code, and that this is fantastic also to integrate into our statistical programs and then our statistical analysis. So we may already be on the way where, on the one hand, we have the linguist making use of the AI statistician, or better probably that we have a linguistician who knows what's happening and can actually then also improve what the AI helper delivers us. But my hope would be that at least we always have someone who is perhaps not a linguistician, but rather a linguistician. So I think we should really sort of keep this strength of knowing about language and language use. So I think this is a kind of beginning trend, but it may not stop there. There is a very nice, provocative, and thought-provoking paper by Ambridge and Blything that was published last year in Theoretical Linguistics with the title, "Large Language Models Are Better Than Theoretical Linguists at Theoretical Linguistics." So they investigated what LLMs actually do with English causative constructions. And here are the main takeaways from the study. When they only use GPT-3, okay? So this is almost history now. So large language models predict human acceptability ratings for these types of sentences with correlations of around R equals 0.9, and themselves constitute theories of language acquisition and representation. Our argument is that large language models are already the leading current theories of how speakers learn and represent these restrictions on causatives and other constructions. Of course, they are not perfect theories, far from it, but they are better theories than any others that have been proposed. And why are the computational theories better? Because the non-computational linguistic theories, and I continue quoting from this article, insist on simple yet empirically inadequate overgeneralizations. Okay, so what I simply want to point to is we may be facing a time when it's not just the AI statistician who is the helper, but we also have the AI doing the analytic work, and we should perhaps work on a future where it's not the AI linguistician taking over and getting the better of us. But it's not, for certain things, unlikely. I will come back to this topic, especially when talking about usage-based grammar at a later point. Okay, impact of AI. So we are already in the middle of the topic. Everybody is talking about AI and LLMs, so it's an omnipresent topic. Now, with regard to English linguistics, we, for instance, discussed this topic at a panel in our IO summer school last year in Freiburg. It was also the topic of 2 IEL expert online fora last year. And in this talk, it will in fact also figure more prominently than I had originally planned. And what I'm going to address in this part is, first of all, I will talk about the relationship between AI and corpus linguistics, possible developments and risky developments, but also positive developments where AI may actually help in the corpus analyses. We will look at what linguistics can contribute to LLM training, and I will then primarily also look at the problem of social and dialect bias in natural language processing systems, especially in chatbots, and to what extent linguistics and the kinds of things that many of us have done in our varieties and world Englishes research has already started to help to improve LLMs to reduce potential dialect bias. Okay, so I will start with the relationship between AI and corpus linguistics. Christian Meyer and colleagues organized a workshop in July on Corpus Linguistics 2040, which data, which methods, which models. And this is taken from the workshop announcement. Recently, corpus linguistic routines have been disrupted by advances in AI-based text generation and machine translation. Some of the challenges they pose are practical and immediate, such as the question how future corpora should handle press and media data that are partly or fully machine-generated. So we actually have the problem of data pollution, okay, so that non-authentic language is increasingly mixed with authentic language, and thus there is the urgent need to develop safeguards against it in corpus compilation and corpus analysis. So we need also then quality control, which is more important than ever. So we need curated corpora, and we need to keep in mind that if a corpus is in some way already biased, AI may perpetuate this bias even further. Also taken from the workshop is a problem that has to do with standardization and norm setting. So other challenges, it says in the announcement, are conceptual. Today, large reference corpora of pluricentric languages such as English, German, and Spanish commonly use national standard varieties as a major ordering principle. By 2040, however, the widespread use of AI-based language technologies in everyday communication may make national boundaries less important. Automatic algorithms may also partly take over from educated elites as the chief agents of linguistic standardization. So there is a danger of outsourcing linguistic standardization and norm formation to non-human agents. Okay, so here are some potential triggers or things that we need to be wary of, okay, and problems that we should try to avoid. But there are also very practical ways in which AI may help the corpus linguist. And present at the workshop in Mannheim was Mark Davis. And he, for instance, has already provided a nice set of tools how AI can be integrated into corpus analysis. And I think you can just read this text for yourself. So what he is offering on his website, english-corpora.org, is the ability to combine the depth and reliability of corpus data with the analytic power of large language models. With just one click, the corpus can send collocates, frequency patterns, phrase lists, or concordance lines to an LLM, which will instantly group, explain, and interpret the data. These AI-powered insights appear directly in the interface alongside the original corpus results. So if you have, for instance, the collocates of the noun cap, then this is a kind of traditional outcome of a collocate search on the basis of your corpus data. But the new thing now is that you have the possibility to click on categorize, and then the AI will automatically make sense of these collocates, suggest semantic groupings, which you then can either take at face value, or at least it's a starting point for your own continued work and more fine-grained work. So it's this kind of tool that Mark Davis suggests. I mentioned that we also talked about AI and linguistics at the summer school, of the IELTS summer school in Freiburg last year. So some of the key overarching questions that were discussed at this panel you see on this list. I will just look very briefly at the second question. So how can linguistics profit from LLMs and AI? So this is something that I will address shortly. And I'm also overall interested in the question to what extent linguistics can help in improving LLMs. And one concrete suggestion how varieties may help in this respect is made, for instance, by Jack Grieve and his group, who in just this year published an article called The Sociolinguistic Foundations of Language Modeling. And The core argument of his team is very easily spelled out and read off these few quotations here. Ultimately, we argue that it is crucial to carefully define and compile training corpora that accurately represent the specific varieties of language being modeled to maximize the performance and societal value of large language models. And if we just go to the last quote here, our core message is that to maximize the value of LLMs in society, it is crucial to carefully consider the specific varieties of language being modeled and to compile corpora that accurately represent these varieties of language, grounded in theories and methods developed in sociolinguistics for understanding language variation and change. The aim of all of this is that if you train LLMs in that way, then you create natural language processing systems that do not suffer from social bias, okay? So what you want to help build is LLMs that do not suffer from this bias and therefore also do not suffer from these two types of social bias, and especially not quality of service bias, where the performance of these systems varies depending on the social background of the user. And you also want to avoid stereotyping harms, that is, discriminating, for instance, against genders or ethnicities. Now, I will pursue the line concerning avoiding quality of service bias by training corpora in a way and training chatbots in a way that avoid dialect bias. And for this purpose, For this purpose, I will move to the next slide. I just wanted to say, in between, I wanted to tell you something about a dream I had, a wonderful speculation that I shared with the audience of a plenary in Korea last year. But just remember this wonderful figure. I will not comment on it, but if you have the time to place a question or push me in a corner during the reception, ask me about this graph. I like it a lot, and it tells us a wonderful story, but it will be irrelevant for us now. It will be irrelevant for us now because what was a dream for me last year has become reality already. And this is much better than a dream, I believe. And what I did was I looked at some recent studies published between 23 and 25 that all offer antidotes against dialect bias in LLMs. Again, I will not look at all of these studies. But the one key study is the one that is also highlighted here by Caleb Zeems and co-authors who started this whole business in 2023. And here are just two key quotations from this study. Dialect differences caused by regional, social, and economic factors cause performance discrepancies for many groups of language technology users. Inclusive and equitable language technology must critically be dialect invariant, meaning that performance remains constant over dialectal shifts. Current systems often fall short of this ideal since they are designed and tested on a single dialect, Standard American English. And what he and his team are therefore doing is to introduce a suite of resources for evaluating and achieving English dialect invariance. The resource is called Multivalue, a controllable rule-based translation system spanning 50 English dialects and 189 unique linguistic features. Multivalue maps Standard American English to synthetic forms of each dialect. And one reason why I immediately fell in love with this, you can perhaps read off the graphic representation because it starts off with E-Wave. So they really sort of took the 235 features in E-Wave and made this the basis for all of their analyses. And this they actually then, what they then next do is described underneath the figure. So they chose out of these 235 features 189. For each structure, we write a perturbation rule to inject it into text. This is the second stage. By partnering with native speakers, we validate perturbation and build both synthetic and gold standard benchmarks, so for understandability, for instance. And finally, we use these resources in stress testing supervised models to reveal dialect disparities and fine-tuning these models on synthetic data to close the performance gap. So here, at least, we have the attempt to integrate what we know, in our case, about dialect syntax into what a chatbot should know in order to understand if a dialect speaker poses a certain question in speaking or in writing to the chatbot. Okay, some of the other studies, I will not go into them in detail, but you see actually they all have the same aim. They want to help avoid LLMs displaying dialect bias and producing harmful responses. And they, for instance, also work with text written in minoritized dialects. And one example, for instance, that is given is for the little Amazon helper Rufus, okay, so who is the chatbot that is relevant, at least used in the US for when you want to place orders. And they just had a comparison with what if you ask the standard American question, is this jacket machine washable? And contrast this with the zero copular African American vernacular English formulation, this jacket machine washable? And you see that the error rates are significantly higher if the chatbot is sort of confronted with this kind of zero copular formulation. So, and the error pattern is actually consistent for many other such features. So this is another approach, and Clisura, for instance, and team, what they are doing is that they take dialect features and translate the queries into standard American English. The opposite approach that you can take, which I come to in a minute, is that you translate standard American English into the various dialects and make the chatbot understand immediately these different varieties, okay? So in this case, for instance, this is yet another group. Standard American English is translated into 5 minoritized dialects of many speakers in the US: African American Vernacular English, Indian English, Jamaican English, Chicano English, and colloquial Singaporean English. What I find also important about this slide, for instance, is that Clisura and others also point to the future. Where is it so important to create chatbots in this way? So making language models accessible to users from diverse backgrounds requires prompting strategies that reflect dialectal variation. And now, crucially, future work should explore extending this approach to high-stakes domains such as healthcare, legal AI, and financial services, where language accessibility is critical. It is also important to investigate how dynamically adapting prompts based on user dialect can enhance real-time interactions with LLMs. So these are all really very, very practical things, and I think all very, very practical things where it looks that our work can make a difference, okay? And seems to make a difference, only that we don't know what these people are already doing with the outcome of our work. All right. I think this is where I can basically stop. Well, I actually mentioned also this study because I know we have also several people in IL who, of course, work not only on Southeast Asian varieties of English, but also especially on South Asian varieties of English. So there is, for instance, one research team that specifically focuses on the dialects of South Asian speakers in the US. So they concentrate on this subset of world Englishes. So you see already that increasingly such studies are really streamlined, and it's different for different speaker groups. You try to create the appropriate LLMs. Fascinating work, I believe. How are we doing for time? Don't tell me 10 minutes because I have a bit more. All right, I have no watch or anything, so I'm just flying completely blind. I don't see anything. So what's the time? 22. All right, okay. Okay, so I wanted to make this very brief anyway, but I talked a lot about language variation in world Englishes, so I think even though also Elizabeth Traugott pointed to this as a rich area of study in English linguistics in the future, I will keep this even shorter. Nevertheless, I wanted to mention that I consider it very laudable enterprises to have more corpora in World Englishes, and I was also very happy to see that we have 2 workshops actually at this conference that want to have a focus on the outer and the expanding circle, especially also historical corpora, because so recently I wrote an article on subordination, subordinators in Caribbean English Creoles, and really there is very little data. So you would really like to have more historical data where you can just take your information from. Okay, but otherwise, forget about the roadmap. I just wanted to say, for the future of World Englishes, I would be happy if it wasn't a kind of study of ever more fine-grained phenomena in every individual World English of the world. I think this is nice empirically, you can use your statistics, but I think it is also to some extent boring. And what you need to do is you need a bit more of theorization also for what you are doing in World Englishes. And therefore, I just wanted to give as one example what Thomas Hoffmann suggested in his little book on the cognitive foundation of post-colonial Englishes, where he suggests a research program for construction grammar as the cognitive theory for the dynamic model. I think it's that kind of study that we should actually follow more. In general, we should also follow more or take the risk of studying lexicogrammar. Okay, because this is where we find especially processes of endonormatization. And he says actually his theory is particularly strong once it comes to the mesoconstructional level. Okay, so that's all I have to say really on this topic. But having mentioned the usage-based approach, of course I would say this is the dominant theoretical paradigm that we have in English linguistics, especially in empirical and corpus-based English linguistics these days. Let's say I just wanted to point to 1 or 2 problems that we have and that need to be solved. And one of the problems you see immediately when you look at the slide. Okay, so there's no dearth in sort of construction grammars that you see around. From the 1990s onwards until 2024, when Dunn suggested computational construction grammar. And also we all know not all construction grammars are usage-based, nor is usage-based linguistics all about construction grammar. But since especially usage-based construction grammar is so important for our field, I think we should also do something to strengthen this approach. And I think what is simply needed is a heightening or refining of its conceptual, analytic, and predictive rigor that make it even more amenable to empirical testing. It must not degenerate to a theory that does not exclude anything and is not falsifiable. And to be honest, this is also what the specialists themselves consider as a major problem. So in Boas and others, they have a special issue in 2024, Quo Vadis construction grammar, where they had a questionnaire sent out to well-known construction grammarians. I'm sure Graham Trousdale, for instance, also filled in one of these forms. And there are points of agreement, but there are also major points of criticism and disagreement. And many people actually from the community criticize that there is no single unified theory and that there are no predictions possible, that there are no falsification criteria available. So all I want to say at this point is I think we need to work on this necessarily. And very briefly, since she also brought up the topic of AI, Adele Goldberg was also among the people that were asked to specifically contribute to this special issue. Again, with the question, how do you envisage the future of construction grammar? And she simply points primarily in her talk, not just to the wonderful and bright future of construction grammar, but she says, in particular, LLMs may play a crucial role in the further development and theoretical development of construction grammar because for the first time, the LLMs offer a dynamic model and not a static model. And she gives a number of examples in her article, which she tried out on ChatGPT-4, where she says it's amazing what kind of natural linguistic knowledge ChatGPT has, what kinds of really everyday statistical and inferences this system actually draws, how human-like, in essence, the algorithm works. So this is what she tested out with regard to a number of little tasks that she gave ChatGPT-4. And what she ultimately then concludes is that GPT models put on full display the power of constructionist models. Systematic investigation of such models will likely help us better understand parallels and differences with human language and cognition. We need to move away from static representations of the construction net. She calls this construction net, other people call it constructicon, and embrace dynamic models to the extent possible. So I just wanted to remind you of my little graph where it says the AI linguistician. Perhaps, is this the future? Well, she also points in a kind of this direction. Okay, so it will be interesting to see to what extent construction grammar can be pushed forward with the help of LLMs. She also has to say a few things about disciplines that are also represented among us. Fieldwork across languages and varieties of language will continue to be highly valuable. That's the good news, right? Sociolinguistics has long provided compelling evidence for the usage-based approach to language. And then, finally, something that will then help me moving on to the next part of my talk. Applications of the constructionist approach to education are among the most exciting directions for constructionists to develop. Okay, so I will not go through this slide with problems and promises. This is more or less a summary of what I said. I just want to point again, however, to the fact that I think we should work much harder to implement what we know about the role of constructions and the constructicon in L1 language acquisition to their role in L2 language acquisition and language learning. So I think what we know about constructions and ready-mades should really make it into school education, into university education of future teachers and teacher training. And this already leads me to the last part of my talk. It's the second one. I just wanted to remind you of the responsibilities that Traugott mentioned in her talk. And these responsibilities are responsibilities of IEL and our community to research, to teaching, and to the profession and the public. And when we just think of our responsibilities with regard to teaching and school education, then the important thing is that we should never forget that, at least in most countries, the backbone, the largest proportion of our students are future teacher students. So I think we should therefore also look more into what is it that we can offer to them that they can integrate in their practical curricula and how the classroom practices can be designed. And there are special initiatives by national linguistics associations, I'm sure in Spain as well, but also in Germany, how one can make linguistics more relevant to school education and language learning in schools. So this is more or less the same story that I just said, and we devoted IEL online fora to this question. We had one already, and in November we will have one chaired and moderated by Julia Schlüter, Innovations in Teaching Digital Data Literacies for Linguistics, and above all, IEL created a new prize, okay? So for teaching innovation, that was advertised for the first time this year, and the first winner of this is here among us. It's Julia Schlüter, and she will present to us what it is that she has to offer, not just to the English linguistics community, but also to the teacher community, people who have already left university or had left university long ago, but how can you introduce them, for instance, to corpus linguistics, and how can you make use of Core Plus in order to design classes and practices that help in the actual teaching of the English language, and especially teaching grammar of the English language. Another responsibility is to do something for us in the public, okay? The public arena. These are the kinds of things that one should do if one wants to communicate English, or specifically or linguistics, in and to the public. We should communicate about language use, we should raise language awareness, but we should also be inclusive and respect the perception of speech, language, and norms by members of the speech community. And we know that Mr. and Mrs. Everyday in the street often have rather prescriptivist views, and we simply have to acknowledge this and work with this. We need to be inclusive and respect and value the observations by lay linguists, whether seemingly impressionistic or not, vis-a-vis purely disembodied corpus-based data and generalizations of the professional linguists, not because something is only documented in a corpus. It is necessarily less interesting to hear what are really very recent developments that people observe in the world around us that have not found their way into a corpus yet. Okay. And what is also important with regard to our informants in individual communities is a reciprocal approach to public engagement. So we should give something back to the informant community that we are investigating. We should involve the stakeholders in these communities. And as a consequence of all that, of all these initiatives, our hope is to raise the public image of linguists, since, as Dan McIntyre in his online forum actually said, linguistics is a misunderstood discipline. All right, in this case, let me also remind you that IEL is taking this very seriously. This is also why we created a new prize for public outreach, okay? And the first winner here is Celeste Rodriguez Luro, whom we have here, and you will be able to hear what she actually achieved in Australia, and it's quite impressive. Among other things, let me just mention this. She arranged for a cooperation with Google. It's the first ever cooperation of Google with a topic that has to do with English linguistics, and it has to do with creating voice-operated chatbots that are able to interact with speakers of Aboriginal English and Torres Strait Creole. So it's exactly, again, this kind of working against dialect bias that she has achieved. It's a multi-million project. Some first articles were published, somewhat 200 in the first month of this. It started in February. And just these first some 200 articles got, on the whole, 75 million reads. So there is an interest out there, okay? And we can actually serve these things. And we thought, having done this thing as one of a package of public outreach initiatives by Celeste, earns her the prize, the IEL Prize 2025. Okay, so I will not say anything about the profession. I think I said already how we react to these responsibilities. So to furthering research, to the furthering of teaching and education, to the furthering of the public image of linguistics, and especially English linguistics. As I mentioned in my presidential address, we have reserved one vice president for each of these functions. So in general, I think the society is in very good shape. Well, if one wanted to wish for something, we would like to have even more members, okay? Because I think we have a very, we have the vast majority of our members from Europe. Okay, so I see far more potential also to have more people from North America and other parts of the world, but especially also North America, given the number of linguists we have there, is really strikingly underrepresented. We would also like to have more submissions to the prize competition. So next time you see, for instance, submit something for the Richard Hogg Prize for best paper by an early career researcher, don't just sort of delete the message or just print it out and put it in the cupboard or something. No, just inform your colleagues, look for the relevant people and suggest them to us. And of course, I have a little wish, and I guess some of you may side with me on this. I think in many countries, the English departments are still somehow asymmetrical. So we have really typically a clear majority of wonderful people, let's say, doing English literature and cultural studies, but linguists are still very much in the minority. Maybe we can also do something in the long run. Become deans, become presidents, rectors, work on this, okay? All right. I need 4 more minutes. Is this granted? Because then you will have everything in a nutshell. Is that right? Okay, perfect. Conclusion will be fairly brief, but you clearly deserve a final word on the triple P subtitle of this plenary. P1, prospects. I'm convinced that, as in the past, there will be many and manifold bright prospects of English linguistics in the next quarter century. The discipline will no doubt keep going strong and will continue to spearhead methodological and theoretical innovation in linguistics far beyond the world of English, as it has done in the course of the past 6 decades. It will gain even further in strength and impact when successfully joining forces with applied linguistics. English linguistics will remain the stretched out hand to and powerful source of inspiration for all branches of empirical and theoretical linguistics. All it needs for that, it has at its fingertips at this point already, and the next generations of exquisite linguists exploring the English language in all its rich facets are already well on their way, and quite a number of them are among us here at this conference and in this very lecture hall. P2, problems. Well, there are no real problems, I see. What I see are rather risks or challenges, not in a euphemistic, but in the real and true sense of the word. Moreover, none of these challenges cannot be mastered, and once mastered, they may well be turned into further strengths of English linguistics. Just think of the only 2 major points of concern which I addressed in my talk. Namely, first, that we should not allow the statistician or even AI linguistician to get the better of us. Meaning, we should by all means make intelligent use of statistics and statistic modeling, and yes, we should integrate AI tools and language models into our everyday practices without, however, forgetting that what we primarily are, linguists or linguisticians, firmly rooted in the study of language. And secondly, that it is necessary to further refine usage-based construction grammar as the most promising guiding theoretical paradigm of our discipline for many years to come. Now, AI was a factor at various points in my talk, which can't have come as a big surprise to you in a plenary daring a look at the next 2 to 3 decades. But I can only repeat myself, I see considerably more opportunities than risks for a mutual, beneficial interaction and integration of linguistics and AI applications. Which leads me to P3, promises. Promises in the sense of firm commitments for the next quarter century. Following from P1 and P2, the first set of such promises relates to the further advancement of English linguistics and the discipline of linguistics at large. A second set of promises relates to our serious engagement with school education, as well as future and already practicing teachers. And a third set to our engagement with the general public and, for example, our engagement with companies, institutions, or communities developing language-based public services, such as dialect-sensitive chatbots. At its most general, I would hope for the promise of both current and future members of our discipline, all of them ideally members of IEL, that we remain sensitive to all the expectations and critical questions which our students, our informants, the people out there, or the media may have with regard to us experts of the English language and what it is that we have to offer as a contribution to society. I'm almost done, and yet in my very, very last minute, please allow me a moment of reflection on a somewhat more sobering note. This is because I'd like to end not with promises alone. With these, there are 2 things that come or should come with these promises and bright prospects of English linguistics in the next quarter century, and you see this addressed under my moment of reflection. And what comes with this are responsibilities, and underlying them, a certain sense of gratefulness, perhaps even a touch of humility. In a quiet moment, all of us should acknowledge the fact that, in many countries at least, the members of the English linguistics community find themselves in a somewhat privileged, more comfortable position compared with that of linguists working on language in general or one of the many other languages in the world. Most importantly, this earns us many more positions at universities and thus many more possibilities to do and advance linguistic research and to employ and train early career researchers. The sole reason for this is the English language itself. Its global and ever-growing importance as the international language, the global lingua franca, and not because linguists working on English are necessarily better than our fellow linguists in other language or general linguistics departments. In short, therefore, this gratefulness and sense of humility should feed and fuel our responsibilities for making the prospects and promises I outlined in my talk come true, and for advancing linguistics, along with the perception of linguists in the public, to yet a higher level in 2050. Thank you.